And now we are ready to approach the third one, SAVIO SILVERIA. SAVIO is a Salesian priest of Don Bosco, presently based in Mumbai in India. He holds a master's degree in international cooperation and development from the University of Pavia in Italy. He is a founder of the Don Bosco Green Alliance, which is the platform that brings together all the environmental initiatives and activities of the Salesian congregation. He's presently a member of the Salesian Youth Ministry Department in Rome and serves as the coordinator for integral ecology. He is also actively involved in promoting eco-pedagogy in the field of education. So, dear Savio, the floor now is yours, please. We are really ready to listen to your presentation.
Thank you very much for that introduction. A very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you from whichever part of the world you are joining. I'm happy to be present with you today and to share with you a few thoughts. Thank you to the organizers of this course for your invitation to be with you this afternoon. Well, my dear friends, since the theme for the session today is on integral ecology and eco-education, I thought that I would share a few thoughts with you on eco-pedagogy. Allow me at the outset to state that there is a difference between ecological education and eco-pedagogy. Of course, these are matters that I'm sure most of you are familiar with, so bear with me for repeating maybe what you already know. We understand that ecological education focuses largely, let us say, on the natural ecosystem, on what we would call nature, on conservation, on sustainability, on strategies to protect the natural world. This all goes into what we would call ecological education. Of course, let us say in a simple manner without going into the technicalities of it. Eco-pedagogy, on the other hand, is a broader educational approach. It is a teaching learning process. The reason that I'm talking about eco-pedagogy this afternoon is because as Catholic institutions, many of us are involved in education, be it in schools, be it in university, be it in technical and vocational education, be it in a pastoral setup, whether we have the Sunday school. In so many different fields, we are in the teaching ministry. And therefore, employing eco-pedagogy in each of these really has got a certain value. Like I said, eco-pedagogy is really a teaching learning process. It aims at forming persons who recognize themselves as being integral to the ecosystems. And it aims, or its objective again, is to cultivate an ecological consciousness, ecological responsibility, and the capacities for ecological praxis. This is a very brief definition, so to say, of eco-pedagogy. Of course, as many of us would be aware, there are many approaches to eco-pedagogy. And the different approaches that are there, or the different eco-pedagogies, if you want to use that term, are based on the different philosophies in which that particular eco-pedagogy might be anchored. For example, we have Paulo Freire, who is very closely associated with eco-pedagogy. And you would have a whole stream or a whole brand of eco-pedagogy that looks at the Freirean approach to eco-pedagogy. But today, when I speak about eco-pedagogy, particularly in this session, but let us say, in my general work in this field, the eco-pedagogy that I am talking about is based on the teachings of Pope Francis, based largely on the two encyclicals of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. These are the two bases, or the philosophy is drawn out largely from these two encyclicals, on which we are now developing this eco-pedagogy about which I am speaking this afternoon, like I said, in the context of ecological education. Allow me very briefly to touch upon the 5 principles, or if you want to say the 2 principles and the 3 processes of eco-pedagogy, which are drawn from, like I just mentioned, these 2 encyclicals of Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti. The first principle is what we are talking about today: integral ecology. Of course, the first speaker has led us through a very comprehensive presentation on what integral ecology is. I will not be touching upon those points, but allow me to point out that we as human beings, as persons, we live simultaneously in various ecosystems. We live, for example, in the natural ecosystem, the natural world, but we also live in the social ecosystem. We belong to a cultural ecosystem. We belong to a political ecosystem. We live in an economic ecosystem. We live in all these ecosystems simultaneously. It is not as if, part of my life is in one ecosystem for today. At some other moment, it will move to another ecosystem. We live in all these ecosystems, natural, social, political, economic, cultural, simultaneously. That is the interconnection and the interdependence that we are talking about ecosystems. And again, we live in these various ecosystems at different levels. At the local level, in the city in which I am, I have my own social ecosystem. I will have my own political ecosystem, the local natural ecosystem. But I don't only live at the local level. I also live at a national level. I live at a global level. So we live simultaneously in different ecosystems, but again at various levels. Now, eco-pedagogy focuses on enabling the learner to overcome a fragmented view of reality, because that very often is a huge problem. We see reality as extremely fragmented. This is the economic world, this is the political world, this is the social world. But the fact is, all these ecosystems are interconnected, interdependent, and they have repercussions one on the other. The causes for an issue, for a problem, might lie in one ecosystem, but the consequences might be totally in a different ecosystem. This is an understanding that we need to enable our learners to gain. Of course, both the speakers earlier have touched upon various examples, be it in mining, be it in land use and agriculture. But in talking about the fact of living in various ecosystems, allow me to pick up a very current example, something that we are living through in the present days. And that is the war that we are witnessing in the Middle East, in the Gulf, and particularly the present war that is going on in Iran, America, Israel, whatever. At one level, we might be led to believe that a war is a reality within the political ecosystem. It is something fought between governments. It is a reality that affects government policies. It is a war that is decided by governments. But as we are seeing very really, it is not only an issue of the political ecosystem. It is an issue that is affecting the economic ecosystem. This war, which has blocked the Strait of Hormuz and therefore created an energy crisis across the world, is having huge economic consequences. So, a political decision or decisions which have been taken in the political ecosystem are having global consequences in the economic ecosystem. Maybe we are not talking sufficiently about this war and other wars, the consequences on the natural ecosystem. There are massive consequences on the natural ecosystem because of wars. There are already many reputed studies available online which talk about the emissions of the 2-year war between Israel and Palestine, which we have just seen. Fortunately, we are presently witnessing, a ceasefire. But the kind of emissions caused by war, again, the devastation of ecosystems. So yes, war is having multiple consequences on the natural ecosystem. It is having consequences on social ecosystems, not just on the social, cultural, day-to-day life of the countries which are presently at war, Iran, for example, or Palestine or Lebanon, but it is having consequences on the social life of people across the world. There is in India, where I live at the moment, a shortage of cooking gas. So households are struggling to cook the daily meals. People have reduced from 2 meals to 1 meal or from 3 meals to 2 meals. This is a social consequence of war. So we see how when we talk about integral ecology, this is the first aspect that yes, when we are talking about eco-pedagogy, we help the learners to understand that we are living in many ecosystems at the same time. All are interconnected and all have consequences one on the other. The second principle is collective flourishing. Collective flourishing. It is a principle that we draw from the natural ecosystem. Of course, in a simplistic way, again, without going into technicalities, we know that from a long-term perspective, in an ecosystem, either the entire ecosystem flourishes or the entire ecosystem goes into decline. Both are experienced collectively. Well-being is never purely individual. We all either flourish collectively or we decline collectively. I understand that these statements need a lot of discussion, explanation, etc. But for shortage of time, I just leave it at that. Fratelli Tutti, of course, Laudato Si, but also Fratelli Tutti talks about this universal collective flourishing when it highlights solidarity and universal fraternity. Allow me just to quote a single line from the document where Pope Francis tells us we need to return to promoting the good for ourselves and the whole human family and thus advance together on an authentic and integral growth. That if universal advancement has to happen, it has to happen for everyone. So yes, this is the second principle of eco-pedagogy, which moves logically from understanding that we live in various ecosystems and they have a connection with one another. The whole understanding of collective flourishing, that we cannot cultivate a selfish attitude believing that I alone can profit, but in the long run, ultimately, everyone loses together. The third principle, and the next three more than being principles are also processes which are actually adopted in the teaching learning space, is immersive learning. I understand that we are running short of time, so I will rush through very briefly. Immersive learning, which is really critical in the understanding of eco-pedagogy, where we do not just rely on the textbook or on pre-packaged knowledge, but rather where the world becomes the classroom and daily experiences become the primary text which need to be read and interpreted. Our daily experiences, they become the primary text which need to be read and interpreted. And therefore, exposure to various realities in education becomes extremely important. Of course, we understand when we are talking about actual educational institutions, we will have the learners at various stages, be it primary school, middle school, secondary school, university, and therefore, even the exposure, the experiences need to be graded. And these are exposures to all ecosystems, to nature, what is happening in our local nature, to poverty, what is happening around us when we talk about poverty, to social conflict. We don't isolate ourselves, we don't insulate the learners, but we expose them to these realities so that the younger generation understands that this is the world in which I am living. The fourth principle, again, a process in the teaching learning process, is critical inquiry. In fact, whichever eco-pedagogy that you might look at, I spoke about a variety of eco-pedagogies or various approaches to eco-pedagogy at the start. Critical inquiry really lies at the heart of eco-pedagogy. Every system of eco-pedagogy looks at critical inquiry. Critical inquiry flows naturally from immersive learning. Here, the learner is actually encouraged to ask questions. Why does this problem exist? Who benefits? Who suffers? These are fundamental questions. The previous speaker speaking about Africa and rare earths, touched upon this point. Who benefits? Who suffers? What is the root of the issue? In which ecosystem does the cause lie? And in which ecosystem are the consequences felt? This is all critical inquiry, going in depth into understanding an issue. And the fifth and the final principle is what we call hopeful praxis. Hope. We have just come out of the year of hope. Hopeful praxis. Because sometimes we might think, that looking at the world and its problems can leave us depressed. Eco-pedagogy really focuses on hope, building hope, and not just in an abstract manner, but it builds hope by cultivating in the learner the attitudes, the skills, the behavior, all that it takes to actually work for transformative action. How can I change the situation? This is the hopeful praxis. And this praxis is not something that begins tomorrow, day after, when I pass out of university. We already employ or engage the learner in this hopeful praxis. What can I do today, even as a primary school student? As a young child in Sunday school, for example, what can I already do? What can I change in my behavior in order to respond to the issues that I have seen earlier? Of course, in hopeful praxis, we also look very much at ourselves, and this is something stressed at Laudato Si, not believing that the problem is always caused by someone else, but as Pope Francis, as Laudato Si tells us, what do I change in my own lifestyle in order to respond to the problem? My consumeristic lifestyle, for example, that demands rare earths could be causing a problem for Africa. So this is the hopeful praxis. Those are the 5 principles of eco-pedagogy. Allow me to conclude by saying that, the objective of eco-pedagogy is really to create a generation of persons, who have the knowledge, values, attitudes, skills, and behavior for building a world in which everyone flourishes collectively. Thank you so much for your kind listening.